Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And today we're going to talk about superheroes.
Yes.
Yeah. And more...
You heard that right.
That's
superheroes.
Right. Superheroes. Comic book superheroes, to be precise. And their impacts on our perspective of how things work. Or maybe even what they reveal to us about how we think as a society. That's very zoomed out, so let's get a little bit more zoomed in and talk about what we mean. So what we've noticed with superheroes is that there tends to be this concept of different styles of how superheroes come about. And in particular, we wanted to focus in on Spider-Man versus Batman.
Yeah.
Now, what we've noticed about Spider-Man versus Batman, and this is actually something that we've been talking a lot about because it's really intriguing to us. Spider-Man is a superhero that was bit by a radioactive spider. And overnight, he went from Joe Schmo, Peter Parker, average dude, into immediately he was thrust into a superhero role because he had these insane powers that came along with getting bitten by a radioactive spider. On the other side, we have Batman. Now, Batman wasn't a superhero in the traditional sense because he never had mystical powers. He never could do anything superhuman. He had ridiculous amounts of wealth, but he also had a focus, the revenge of his parents' death. He had something that he focused on, and over time, he was able to become almost superhuman in his abilities because he just built skill and developed skill over a decade. And then when he came back from his wanderings in Asia and came back with these extraordinary abilities to physically outclass everybody else, and then combine them with technology that was built that he could afford to purchase, then he became like a superhero or, somebody who is bigger than life because of just persistence and resource. So what's fascinating about this is, first of all, an intriguing question that you might ask yourself if you are into superheroes, and a lot of people are nowadays because it's not just relegated to the realm of like comic books and geeks, watching or reading graphic novels. Now we've got a bunch of movies around them and many incarnations of the Batman story and a few incarnations of the Spider-Man story. And which one are you more attracted to? Which one would you say more represents how you see people becoming larger than life?
Yeah.
Does the person get bit by a radioactive spider? Is it something that almost gets ordained upon you by accident? And then now you've got to try to figure out how to deal with this newfound power. And you have to figure out the whole, with great power comes great responsibility. Or are you more attracted to the person who has no real, larger than life, no actual mystical powers, but just works their ass off and then eventually is able to right wrongs and solve or injustices and become larger than life through resource.
Yeah, this is and also in a broader context, we've talked about this before. It's a different, looking at superheroes, but it's also a way to look at thought development from East and West. Eastern cultures, Asian cultures tend to look at the way humans develop and things develop. It's more of the individual is the one that takes the proaction, and it's a discipline. It's done over time. You think of Zen Buddhism. It's a lot of disciplines and practices you build. Where in the West, we have a very Christian, Judeo-Christian idea where, you're bestowed something. You have salvation. You have a moment of salvation, and that's what changes you. You have this change agent that happens to you by a higher power. It's not by your own discipline or your own willpower. So it's not only are we talking superheroes, we're also talking about Eastern-Western thought, kind of how these thoughts developed. And I'm guessing the superheroes came out of the two different schools of thought and how the East and West looks at, I guess, a path of consciousness, it really, ultimately. So I know I just got super abstract there all of a sudden, but this is a little bit of an abstract conversation. And I think our job today on this podcast is to talk about this in abstract terms, then bring it down into tangible terms. What does this mean for your life as you're joining us right here on this podcast? And I think these ideas will also play into other things we've talked about on previous podcasts, like the drama triangle. We've talked about the drama triangle where there's a victim, villain, hero, And this notion, here in the West, I think the drama triangle is probably more prevalent because we're waiting for somebody to come save us. That's what we've been trained to wait for Judeo-Christian ideals. We're waiting for that savior to come and bite us and turn us into Spiderman and make us the superhero we're supposed to be. So there's a lot of things we can unpack here and talk about, and different ideas I think will be really fascinating. So we're going to now take this abstract and start bringing it down to tangible terms.
So for me, when I think about this topic, and what's so intriguing about it is that the concept that you could be bitten by a radioactive spider and suddenly have all of these powers bestowed upon you really does feel, like you mentioned, have its roots in this concept that things are either bestowed upon you or they are not. You are either the lucky recipient of something bigger, larger than life, you have a path carved out for you, or you do not. Versus this idea that we can get whatever we want as long as we work hard enough to get there. And you can see the rhetoric that comes up, at least in the culture of the country that we live in. You can see the rhetoric is a kind of a smushing of the two concepts. Like in America, it's supposed to be the land of opportunity. And if anybody can be a self-made millionaire or billionaire at this point. And if you just work hard enough, you can do whatever you want to, which is the rhetoric we hear a lot in the United States. And then combine that with, like you mentioned, the foundational paradigmatic roots of Judeo-Christianity, which is, like Moses, God comes and finds you. Or, Paul, you're on the completely wrong road, and then God blinds you in the road, and then suddenly you see the light. There are all these stories that are rooted in what is supposed to be considered, ultimate truth, which it may or may not be. The stories themselves may or may not be true. But what we pull from them is this concept that when you have something big to do, somebody else is going to choose you and they're going to bestow it upon you. They're going to, like pop up and go, okay, it's time for you to go be living your real life. And so we kind of sit around waiting for that to happen. We sit around waiting for the radioactive spider to come approach us, or to be blinded on the road to Damascus, or whatever it is that we're waiting for. We wait for something to happen, profound to happen to us, to go, okay, now I know the right direction to take. Now I know what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. Now I know what the big game that I'm supposed to be playing is. And I was just waiting for that moment to happen. Versus this idea of incremental stages where it becomes revealed over time. Now, what's interesting in the Batman story is that there was a decision point. His parents were murdered in front of him, and that set him on a path. So even in that story, there is a profound moment of decision point that ends up on this path. But I don't think in Batman, what he ended up doing was not what he initially started out to do. What he initially started out to do was to seek revenge. What it ended up happening is he ended up becoming, what is the line? Like the hero that we need, maybe not the hero that we want, or the hero we deserve. Yeah, maybe not the hero that we want. And so this idea that he was not intended, Bruce Wayne was not intended to become the person, the vigilante that works with the police. He originally was intended to right a wrong. And yet, because of his hard work and over time, the path that Batman ended up going down was revealed to him over time.
Yeah. So how does this play out in kind of daily life is what the question I would have if I was right here with us, which you are listening. So look at things like American Idol is a very concept of a Western concept of I'm going to be discovered. I've got what I believe is a talent. I'm going to go and I'm going to audition for judges. They're going to put me on a stage, and America's going to bite me on the arm, a spider bite me on the arm, and now I'm going to be a big megastar. It's people that play the lottery or go to Las Vegas and play the slot machines or the table games in order to make a lot of money overnight. It's this idea that I can win it big. There's a chance I could get bit by this bug, and everything's going to change for me overnight. If only that talent scout would see me at the baseball game, and I'm swinging for the fences. They're going to recruit me for college, which is going to put me on the roster to be recruited by, the Major League Baseball teams. And now I'm going to be a baseball star. If only I can get there, and only I can get bit. And obviously, there are certain people that are working on skills during this time period. They're building some skill, but they're looking for that one spider bite, quote unquote, to get found, to get discovered. YouTube stars, and this actually, I think, the thing that really is crazy is this actually happens in the United States. People do tend to sometimes get bit by spider bugs. Wait a minute, what am I saying? Spider bites, metaphorically speaking. You think of, we were talking about this earlier, Andy Sandberg, who was a YouTube star. Him and his friends were making YouTube videos. And all of a sudden, Lorne Michaels, who is the producer of Saturday Night Live here in New York City in the United States, says, hey, I like what these guys are doing. I'm going to hire them all as writers, and Andy Sandberg's also going to be one of the performers. And so now, basically, he got bit by a bug and got an opportunity he wouldn't have had that not happened, right? Because, maybe he wasn't in New York City at the time. I'm not exactly sure his exact story, but I know enough of it to know that he was found, he was discovered.
I think it was in L.A.
Yeah. So this can happen, and I think that it reinforces this notion, this modern king-making ability. If you're on Oprah, if Antonia and I are invited onto Oprah to talk about Personality Hacker and some of the resources and trainings we do, that's kind of like being bit by a spider bug. That would put us into a completely another level, a trajectory that we are not on at this moment. So. And I think it comes down to what you said. There's this hodgepodge in the United States. There's this little bit of this skill building element to it. And then there's also this getting bit and getting really big by getting, quote unquote, discovered that happens as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the question could come down to, if you're not going to use comic book metaphors, is success hard work or is success luck? And that's really the question. So Andy Samberg, what's fascinating about that and other YouTube performers that get discovered is that I don't think any of them would say that they had gotten bit by the bug, right? Or by the spider. I think they would say that they worked their asses off and then their hard work paid off. If we were invited onto Oprah, we'd be like, wow, this is the culmination of all this work. And yet we're not at the Oprah level at this point. So it would very much from the outside feel like Breakout, these people who just got discovered and they got the big time. I remember when I was a kid, I was watching the Grammys are the award show for music, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I was watching the Grammys and I remember somebody who I would have called a breakout star, like they were brand new that year. I'd never heard of them. I remember they won a Grammy and they came up and they said, this is the culmination of so much hard work. And I was a kid at the time. And I was thinking, but you guys just got discovered. What are you talking about? Like you've just only been doing it for like the year, right? Your song just came out. What do you mean the culmination of a bunch of hard work? And then it dawned on me, I think I was probably 12 or 13 when I watched that. And it dawned on me, wow, I bet they've been working a really long time and nobody saw them work and nobody watched any of their hard labor. And so it appears as if it just magically happened overnight. And then we do have, that's one piece of the puzzle. That's one piece of something that legitimately happened. So somebody suddenly gets has a breakout moment and we unconsciously say to ourselves, aren't they lucky, right? They got their big break. And then you've got people who are truly breakouts, like the boy band style, where they are fully manufactured and some 16-year-old kid who can kind of sing and might be really good with dancing or can kind of dance and is a really good singer. They get talent scouted from absolutely nowhere. And then all of a sudden within a year, they're women are throwing their underwear at them and they can't go anywhere without being mauled by legions of fans wanting them to take pictures with them. So there really are legitimately those bit by a spider moment, radioactive spider moments. And then there's the perceived bitten by radioactive spider moments, which are not actually that. Those are more like the Batman. And then there are actual Batman moments or Batman scenarios where somebody has just been working, and they've created a sustainable system. And over time, that sustainable system has caused extraordinary rewards back, like people who are like mega, billionaires at this point. I think of the investor that we talked about in Hardwired for Wealth.
Charlie Munger?
No, the other one.
Warren Buffett?
Why can I always remember Charlie Munger's name and never Warren Buffett's name? Why does Warren Buffett's name always escape my brain? I don't know why. Warren Buffett. All right, so like the Warren Buffetts who built an empire over time. Oprah Winfrey built an empire over time. So these are people who are more of the Batman model. So the question is, where can we find our personal success? How can we frame success in our minds? How can we rewire our minds to encourage us to put ourselves in the pathway of success, regardless of how success happens? And I think what makes this not so simple to answer is that these are nodes in a system, right? Like these are all components. All of these things like luck, hard work, time and circumstance, opportunity, like all these different components of success, they are all important nodes in the system, and you got to have all of them, right? And sometimes it happens overnight, and sometimes it happens over decades. And if you're waiting for it to happen overnight, you might actually be sabotaging the nodes in the system, expecting success to happen in one way and putting all your eggs in that basket, so to speak. And when it never happens, you go, wait, but that's how it happens. And the same could be said of the Batman style. If you think, oh, just hard work is all it takes. I just got to, put my head down and muscle through and just work hard. And you never put yourself in the path of opportunity, right? Like you never see that component, then you might just be yet another person who worked hard their entire lives. And now you might have some retirement, but you never got the level of success you wanted. So it's really about taking a meta perspective, zooming out and going, what are the actual components to success? And am I oversimplifying how I think it happens? Am I assuming it happens in a certain way, and therefore I'm not allowing myself to experience the opportunities of another way of success happening?
Absolutely. And I want to highlight something you said earlier, because I think it's really important. There are people that do get bit by the spider and have an overnight experience. And I would say that's a very, very, very small percentage of people. What's probably more happening is we're seeing the spider bite moment, because that's what's visually seen to all the rest of us. And this is what you said earlier that I want to highlight. There's been work up to that point. But to us, it looks like, wow, that person just wrote a book and now they're a New York Times bestseller. Well, maybe they've been blogging for years. Maybe then they've written like 6 other books that have been turned down, or they've been failures. And this is the success you see. So now you attribute their success to being bit by a spider, and it reinforces this mimetic idea we already have in the West of it's going to happen to me. And so you're like, okay, well, that's what I got to do. I got to get bit by a spider. But remember that most of those times, I think the guy that writes the blog, I can't remember his name, Chris. I actually remember his name, how it looks, but I can never pronounce it.
Guillebeau.
Chris Guillebeau has a book called, what is it, like 475 Days to Overnight Success or something like this. It's like a huge number, like 2 years to overnight success. And in that, he basically talks about this kind of concept that it looks like he had overnight success by getting his book deal and getting a lot of his products and services out there, and now he's doing this full time. And he says, but it actually was years of work over time, and then it looks like overnight success because you've been putting the time and effort into building the skills up to that time point, up to that time period. So I think even in the spider bite moments that we see in life, there has been a lot of Batman up to that point, but we only see that Spider-Man. So we attribute all of that to, luck happening to you.
Yeah.
There's something that somebody said to me one time. I was in a younger time period of my life. I was in business I was dabbling with some multi-level marketing companies, and actually what's great about multi-level marketing is you get a lot of good training when you're in the middle of them. It's not for me. It's not my style of business or how I like to do it, because it's like buying into a franchise, but a lot of people do it. And one of the things, I was very young, I was like 18 at the time. So this was like one of my first business type ventures. And it was great because I learned a lot about sales and all this. And I remember one time, like a mentor of mine in this business I was working in at the time said to me, he said, there is no one in a back room smoking cigars planning your life for you. There's no board of directors in a back room smoking cigars planning your life for you. And I thought, wow, that is so true. And that's kind of how I've envisioned my life going up to this point. Like, I figured that at the time, God and the institutions I was involved in and other people in my life, like parents and other mentors, were all orchestrating things necessarily for me. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not actually what's happening. I'm completely in control of this. Like, I have to do something for things to happen. There is nobody in a back room planning my life for me. There is no planning committee for my life. It starts right here. I am the planning committee. And so it just plays into this whole notion of this idea of being bit by a spider, or people planning your life for you, or this like idea that you're destined for something. You might have an idea of destiny, but I think you still have to work to get there. And this is a notion that I've really changed perspective on the last few years. I've gone way more toward the Batman model than the Spiderman model. And have you had similar experiences? Have you always been a Batman person all your life?
I think I've always been a Batman person. I definitely am an achievement-oriented person, and I think for me, I mean, I know you're an achievement-oriented person too, but I think we came from slightly different paradigms in our youth. I think what made it so that I became like a naturally Batman style. And by Batman style, I mean like you got to, put your head down, muscle through, make it happen yourself, is that I had this like superstar older sibling that my brother's about 9 years older than I am. And apparently he had the highest IQ on record for his high school when he got an IQ test. And the family stories were always about how he could like say these 3-syllable words at 8 months, which is kind of ridiculous. And I'm not sure if I believe it, but that was the family lore. That was the story. And that he just did like anything that he touched turned to gold. He had this Midas touch. So if he was not absolutely, rolling in money, on a bed of money covered by many beautiful ladies, as the saying goes, then it was just because he was being lazy, and anything he wanted to do, he could do. And here I'm the much younger sister, and like I'm okay too, right? Like my parents would like pat me on the head and be like, and you're also very competent at certain things. It was kind of like this, we don't.
You're living in your brother's shadow your whole life.
My whole life, right? My whole life living in my brother's shadow. And even now, my brother is like, he's like, he just goes, I think I want to be a writer. And so he went and wrote a book. And then his first book got nominated for a Hugo Award. So it's like,
and he got a contract for like 6 more.
Yeah, I mean, sort of ridiculous when you really think about it.
He almost got bit by the spider in a sense in that scenario.
And yet when I talk to him, and he calls himself the self-professed luckiest man alive, and he's like, yeah, everything just happens to me. But when you really talk to him, he doesn't know he's communicating this, but I can see it. He is talking about a metric crapload of work. I mean, the guy just sits down and works, and he works, and he works, and he works, and he works. And he has this extraordinary work ethic that he pretends he doesn't have. But because I think he wants the image of his whole life is that everything comes easy for him. And for some reason he bought that. My parents gave him that image, and that's now a part of his identity. So he's got this sort of cavalier, like, oh, I don't work for anything. It just sort of happens to me. But I know he's full of crap. I know the guy has this extraordinary work ethic. And when he wants to do something, he just absolutely, you cannot get between him and his goal. He's absolutely focused, laser targeted. He will manipulate. He will go up, around, over, through. He will do everything it takes to get to what he wants. And it's that willpower combined with a work ethic that I think is actually the secret. Well, I mean, like, being really smart doesn't hurt. He's also rather creative, and that doesn't hurt either. And yet, I don't think those two things are the key to his success. I believe it's his muscle through mentality and there's nothing that's going to get stop him from doing what he wants. And so the story, what's interesting there is that the narrative is in direct contrast with the reality. The narrative is it all comes easy, and the reality is that he's working his ass off. So even there, we get this, it's almost like we have this sense of pride that things come easy to us, or the sense of pride that we got bit by the radioactive spider, so to speak. It's this sense of pride that we've been ordained somehow. Like it's, from on high, it has been ordained that we become or do this thing. And I don't know, there's maybe ego around that. And there's not as much. I think there is some ego about working hard. Like, I've worked hard to get to where I am. There is ego around that too. And also, I think the really successful people might not want it to look like they broke a sweat while they got there. And yet there's nobody who's at the highest levels of success that wasn't just, including the boy bands, including the manufactured boy bands that are like hand-selected cute boys that end up getting thrown into these boy bands. if you look at their schedule, it's insanity.
Yeah.
Like they start at 5:00 in the morning and they are like working 15 hours a day on choreography, and they're just absolutely working their butts off too. So nobody gets to that level without breaking a sweat. And so I think the reason why I was talking about all that is because you're like, hey, are you a Spider-Man or a Batman style? Because I lived in the shadow of that, I felt like I was never, like the radioactive spider had already been taken, right? Like it was already, like if the radioactive spider was going to be in our house, it had already walked into my brother's room and bitten him and died. Like there was no more spiders for me. And so I figured, well, if I was going to get any sort of success, I was going to have to work super duper hard for it. What's interesting about that though, is because I had that mentality from the time I was very young and I wasn't constantly reaffirmed by about my specialness. I think because of that, I learned the lesson earlier that you had to work hard. And I think with my brother, I think he did struggle with that a little bit. I think it took him a while to get to that understanding of having to work super hard.
So I just want to be clear that I didn't sit around and do nothing in my youth, and it's not like I didn't work. I think what it was for me, I think maybe I had a little bit of what, as you're talking, this is coming up for me. Things came easy for me. So I'm an ENFP. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, and I'm very intuitive, and I can pick things up very quickly. And my dad at the time was on radio, and so I was involved in that. They were running an organization, like a youth organization, a Christian youth organization, and they had a camp. And I took to these things: performing, organization, administration, helping with production. Like all these things came very easy to me. And I think what was happening for me is I was working hard and all this stuff, but I almost had the sense that I had already been bitten by the bug, right? Like I'd already been bitten by a radioactive spider, because in my small little world context as a teenager, as a young person, I was so good. I was light years above my peers in being able to manage adult type things. And so I had this notion that I was ordained for something great. Like, man, this is just the beginning. Like I'm a child star already in this little, I didn't realize how small the world was I was working in at the age of 13, when I'm helping produce 2-hour radio programs on a 50,000 watt radio station in Pittsburgh. I didn't realize that's not no other 13-year-olds doing that, right? But I didn't realize how small that actually was, like in the grand scheme of the world. So I graduate, I get a call, and I start thinking like, okay, I'm invincible. I can do anything because I'm amazingly blessed by God or whatever. And then all of a sudden the real world of reality hits me. Like I show up to a job interview and they're like, we need to see your resume. I'm like, well, you don't know how awesome I am? What do you need to see my resume for? Like, can't you just tell by being in my presence how amazing I am? Like, what's wrong with you people? Like, I'm not kidding. Like literally I went to a job and the person kind of knew me that was interviewing me. We had been friends for a little while. Like he kind of knew me. So it wasn't completely, I understood that you got jobs by showing what you did, but he already knew what I did because he had seen me in action and the reason he was courting me for this job was because of the things he had seen I had done. And then all of a sudden he wants to see a resume. And I'm like, what's the point? Like that was insane to me because you'd already seen me in action. You already know what I'm capable of. I think I had this notion that I'd already been bit by the bug. And then all of a sudden my world, it didn't come crashing down. And it wasn't that I wasn't a hard worker, but all of a sudden reality hit me that, oh crap, like I thought I was amazing and the world's telling me that I'm pretty average in all this stuff. I need to get my butt in gear and start learning some skills. Not that I didn't have skills, but learning more skills and bettering those skills because I guess I need this stuff and I didn't realize that. And so then it's this idea that I think God had already ordained me to a certain direction at the time. Like I was under this delusion that God had just bestowed these talents upon me and that it was just going to keep going that direction. And then when it didn't, it really rocked my world. I was very confused and very frustrated. And I think I'm still doing a lot of processing from that because that was what was instilled at me at such a little kid level, that you have talents or you don't. God gives you things or he doesn't. And that's what you do with your life. And there was not this notion that you could learn something you didn't know that was presented to me in my paradigm. It was more about like you're predestined for this, or this is something you have or you don't, and you can increase the skill in that thing you have. But if you don't have it, you don't have it. And if you have it, you have it, and that's just it. Yeah.
I grew up in a religious organization that was super uber organized, and there was a less personal, like in the religious upbringing you had, it was a lot more about like individualism and your personal relationship with God, and how it's all very personal, and God bestows gifts. And, I think it was very individualistic. The religion that I grew up in was very top down, and you're a cog in a machine. So you work super duper hard. And
you're a worker bee.
Yeah, you're a worker bee. It's more like nobody's particularly special, but if you work super duper hard, you can be special with God, but nobody was, there's no superheroes. And I think because of that, what I'm finding so interesting is how much we were fashioned. I think this is kind of the crux of the entire conversation, at least from my perspective, is how much programming we receive. Like your story of the Spider-Man versus my story of the Batman was very much instilled in us from a very young age. And because of that, you were talking about your struggle or your challenge with understanding that the world didn't just automatically perceive your value because you had been bit. I think my challenge is that I have this idea that I'm not particularly special. I just need to work super duper hard. And therefore I lack opportunism. Like I'm not opportunistic at all. And that might sound good, but the truth is that success comes from both. You have to be opportunistic. You have to understand when you're a good match for something. You have to throw yourself in the path of people who are able to, dispense opportunity. And I'm terrible at that, right? I'm like, if I just work super duper hard, people will notice, right? I'll get noticed if I work super duper hard. This podcast was totally your idea. This podcast might be one of the best things that we've ever done. And it's provided all sorts of great opportunities, and I would have never considered it. I would have just, I'm just like, let's sit in front of my computer and just keep writing blog posts over and over and over, and articles over and over, and, let's just dispense extraordinary wisdom through blog posts, and, people will see the value. And the truth is that, no, they won't, right? Like, you have to be personal. You have to give of yourself in a more personal way. You have to be an individual. You can't just be a worker bee. And so my challenge to success is that I just don't think in terms of individualism. I think in terms of just work. And so I think you have to have both components. I'm realizing that as we talk, we're creating a model. We're creating how does success happen? Is it luck or is it hard work? And that's a false dichotomy, right? It's not either, it's both. And there's other components to success as well. And I think really this conversation was so intriguing to me, and I probably have already said this earlier, but the reason why this is so intriguing is because this is about programming. This is about how your mind is oversimplifying how things work. And the story or the narrative that you adopt throughout your life that may be hindering you from going to the next level because you've got this image of yourself. You have this image of yourself as waiting for something, or you not having permission to reach out for the thing that you want because it happens in this way. And this way is whatever fill in the blank way that you've been programmed to think that success happens. Or maybe even that success isn't for you. You're neither Batman nor you're Spider-Man. Other people are Batman and Spider-Man, not you. Like you're just this person, and what's so special about you, and why should you even reach out for greatness, right? Like you're just some schmuck that's watching Batman and Spider-Man clean up the city, right? So it's really about reevaluating the programming and the narratives and stories you're given around success so that you can go, this is my narrative. I may or may not be able to find the root of it. It's probably multiple different roots of this narrative. Multiple people have influenced how I'm seeing life and how it works. And is there any way that I can reevaluate it and go, maybe not so much. Maybe that's not how things work. Maybe my story of how things work is not accurate. Or even in the moment when life slaps you a little bit, right? Like backhands you a little bit because you came in idealistic with a concept of how it works and it didn't work that way. Instead of getting totally demoralized by that and going, oh gosh, everything I ever thought, that's not what's happening. So maybe I should just sit this one out, right? Because I don't have the tools and skills to be able to play a bigger game. Instead of sitting that one out, just go, okay, so I may have actually a portion of this right. Which portions didn't I have right? And how can I just deconstruct what's going on? How can I fillet out the difference between how things work and how things aren't working? And maybe I'm not 100% right, but I'm not 100% wrong. And what's the configuration that I can be doing to ensure that I at least am mentally prepared for success, that I have programmed my mind to position myself for success, as opposed to just kind of seeing it arbitrarily happen to some and not to others.
Yeah. You know, I think this actual podcast is a really great example of this. I've had experience in, I had this idea that I was bit by a bug at a very young age in broadcasting, in media production. And if you go back and you listen to our original podcast from over a year ago, podcast 0001, you can hear, we were still finding our voice. We had some skill, we had some talent, but I would posit that we are much better at communicating and articulating and working with each other on a live or recorded audio format much better now than we were then. We were still learning the dynamic between us. I think both of us could speak into a microphone or present well. We were learning the dynamic between us. We were refining a skill. We were building something. And we've seen our numbers climb based on us really working hard at this, coming up with great topics, interacting with an audience and our community and our tribe, and building skill and continually working at it and not giving up, doing this once a week, every single week, and refining what we do. It's a very Batman-esque model of this. And maybe there's a day sometime, we'll be approached by like an Oprah. It'll be like that. It'll look to everybody else that we've been bit by a spider, but it's because we've worked and we put the time in. The first month we released podcasting, we had like 200 and some downloads, and now we're into the tens of thousands every month of downloads. So it's really exciting to see an audience growing and a tribe growing and people resonating with it. And it feels good to see the work put into something that is a return. And I think that's a key also, is it's tough to keep going when you don't see results in anything, like whether you're doing weight loss or a podcast or anything you're working on. I think sometimes you just want to be bit by the spider in the midst of that, because you want to feel like it's worth it, like you've got success from it. It actually worked. And then also it's the whole idea that, so I guess I'm talking to you if you're listening and you are the type that doesn't just sit around on the couch and wait for the spider to crawl out of the ceiling and bite you. You're the person that does want to take some type of proactivity. I get where you're at if you're in the midst of it and you feel frustration, because I've been there, I think, in anything. But I know any project I endeavor upon, it gets easier as you refine your skills and you get better. And I think that positions you for luck to enter your life. There's that phrase, luck favors the well-prepared, right? And I go back to the whole thing, like this story I have. I was at a conference once where I was talking to an agent she was the person to sign people up to be published books. And she said, "What book ideas do you have?" And I didn't have anything to tell her at the moment. I thought, that is never going to happen to me again. If I ever get lucky enough to be in the presence of a book publisher, person that represents a book publishing company, I'm going to have some ideas in my back pocket. Like I've already have these bulleted out, because what a great opportunity I had. I totally squandered it because I was not prepared. I had a moment of luck with no preparation. And so I think luck favors the prepared in that. And I would say that this idea of building skill is something that came from me. I don't know what your experience is if you're listening to us. And if you've had this idea that, well, stuff, you just kind of put yourself in the right position, stuff will happen, you'll get bit by that. But there are actual things you need to do to be ready for that time period. So that's something else to think about as you're thinking about this journey, this model we're talking about, and how to approach life and approach what you're going to do. And just one last thing, and I'll let you talk, because I think you wanted to say something. The phrase from the Declaration of Independence in the United States keeps coming to my mind as pretty much what we get in this life. Now, this is a codified document for us in this country, but if you can think about this in your life, it starts off by you're granted three things. You're granted life, the very essence of life. You're granted liberty. In other words, you get to make your choices, and you get to pursue happiness. And really, the rest is up to you. And I love that, because it frames something that if you're alive right now and you're listening, you're with us right now listening in, you have life because you're alive and listening. You have the ability to make choices. You may not think it yet or see it all clearly, but you have the ability to be completely sovereign over the choices you make. You're not sovereign over the results of those choices, but you're sovereign over those choices. And you can pursue whatever you want to pursue that seems to make you happy. Those are the things, and it doesn't matter really what country you're in, what circumstance you're in. I know you might resist when I say that. If you say, well, you don't know my circumstance. You don't know that this is going on for me. Yeah, I don't, but I still firmly believe that we all have life because you're alive listening. You have the ability to make choices for yourself. Some of those choices might end you in prison, but you still could make that choice. And you can pursue happiness through those choices. And that's really available to all of us as humans. The humanity of us, we have that ability at the deepest level of who we are. I don't know why I said that, but that phrase just keeps popping into my mind as we're having this conversation.
Yeah, the two things that come up for me as you were talking, and I'm going to harken back to something you said before. The two things that come up for me is that at the beginning of when you were talking, you were mentioning that we sometimes want to be bitten because, we're not sure, or at least what I picked up from what you said is that it's like we're not really sure if what we're doing is going to have the return on investment that we'd like it to have. We might do a lot of work and spend a lot of time and effort in something, and then that ends up being a dead end. And so now we put all this time and effort into this thing, and it didn't really, it didn't return any success. And I was thinking, well, that's why we have to do what we love, because then there's intrinsic reward wrapped into it. If you're doing what you love, if you're doing what you're passionate about, then even if it's a dead end road in the specific way that you're going about it, at least you were doing what you loved in the meantime, so it doesn't feel like it's all squandered time and effort. And then I was thinking, at least for me, what I've noticed is that if I'm doing what I love to do, I know that, in 20 years from now, I don't expect to be doing exactly what we're doing now, right? Like in 5 to 10 years from now, I don't expect to be doing exactly what we're doing now. I know that what is meaningful to me and the things that I have mission around, I know that they're going to alter how they manifest and show up. Sure. I know that the way that I go about them is going to be different than how I'm doing it now. Yeah. And I've gained greater clarity about my direction through action by doing something that I loved doing early on. And I was really clumsy at it. The earliest days of Personality Hacker are almost embarrassing, right? Like they're almost like, I look at some of the videos that I made and some of the content that was created, and I'm like, oh, that's just, okay, that's what that was. And at that time, I was just trying to figure out a way to express something that I thought was important. And now, I've definitely, since you came on board, like things have gotten so much more polished and things have gotten so much more, they're just nicer. Like you just add a nice polished veneer on everything.
Came on board formally. I've been here for a while, but it's always been in like a supporter role.
Right. I think though that things got a lot more polished when you became a co-owner, because then there was something to truly invest in. So you have been with Personality Hacker almost since its inception. Not quite, but almost since its inception. But you really have added like a lot of polish to it since you became invested, right? Fully invested. And that's awesome. And also going through that time period before that and kind of throwing spaghetti against wall and stabbing blindly in the air, which is a bit of what I was doing, that journey allowed me to get clarity on what it is that I wanted. Making mistakes, doing the wrong thing, investing in something that was a dead end, which of course, I had a couple of them, right? We had a couple of them together too. Just dead ends, like tons and tons and tons of work, and it went absolutely nowhere. And it helped me get so crystal clear on what it is that I wanted and where I wanted to end up and go. And once we had that clarity, man, we were unstoppable. And then I find ourselves like, for me anyway, we'll get to a point where I'm like, I forgot what I'm doing. Like, it's hard for me to maybe hold the vision or figure out exactly how I want to be going about what I'm doing at the moment. But I keep plugging away and we keep doing it. And then all of a sudden I'll have this moment of clarity again. And I'm like, oh, that's what I want to be doing. And then boom, off we go again. It's work. And like lots of investment of time and effort. And then, and then we have to have a moment of clarity again. So I find that lack of clarity piece, I find it to be something that can be debilitating for a lot of people if they don't know exactly what they want to be doing, exactly right now. They're not sure if they should move forward because what if they end up wasting all this time and effort? And different personality types absolutely will do this differently. We're both ENPs. I'm an ENTP, you're an ENFP. We learn through doing. Sure. We learn through performance. We learn through taking action. And I think a lot of extroverted types do that. Introverted types, not as much necessarily, especially like the INJ types. I think that they need to get more internal clarity before they can move at all. They need to get a bigger sort of landscape of what's going on for them. But I think we can, just like you and I have discovered that sometimes we'll act without enough planning, and that gets us in trouble, and we go, man, action is always good, but we really needed to plan that now. And now we're dealing with the aftermath of not having planned well enough, and we have to go back and repair some things. I think it can happen with the introverted types, or any type really, that feels like they have to get all their ducks in a row before they take action. They have to know exactly what they're going to be doing before they move on or move forward at all. And I think that puts them in a state of paralysis, like the whole analysis paralysis issue. Like I've got to know exactly what I'm going to do before I take action. And I would encourage people to, first of all, do what you love right now. Right now. Like, you might not love it in 6 months from now, but you love it now. So get into action around the thing you love now. What is a passion for you right at this moment? It doesn't have to be your ultimate endgame BHAG. If you're written about in history books, it doesn't have to be the thing you're contributing. What is something that is of, like, just, it's beautiful to you right now and you just want to pursue it? And get into action. And yes, maybe do a big mind map of what's going, what you would like to do right now and how you'd like it to look. And if you're a planning style, don't rob yourself of the benefits of planning. However, you can get to a lot of diminishing returns on planning. It can get so big in your head that you just don't know where to start. So if you get to a point where you go, I think I feel good enough about, like, you'll have that moment. You will definitely, just like we as EMPs have a moment of like, oh crap, we totally should have planned this and we didn't, right? And we got to go back to the drawing board. You'll have a moment of like, maybe I should start doing stuff. Maybe I shouldn't just be sitting here and perpetually planning it. You'll have a moment of like, yeah, maybe I've got enough of those ducks in a row to make sure to start. And just start doing. As you do what you love, as you get into action, you will gain greater clarity as you go. And you might, just like we sometimes have actively done things that ended up with little to no return on investment for the time and energy investment cost. If you're a planner, you will most likely ditch a portion of your plans. What you planned in your head as being the way to go about it, some of that's not going to pan out. So feel free to go ahead and ditch some of that if it's not working out. But that said, I think it's just really important to do what you love, get into action and into motion, gain clarity as you go, and then figure out what is the programming that is causing you to not have the success you want. Are you more of the Batman style or are you more of the Spiderman style? Are you more of like, I wish somebody would just come find me and understand my intrinsic value and make it happen for me? Or are you the person who puts their head down and just muscle through and go and misses opportunities around you because you're not thinking in terms of, putting yourself in the path of luck or putting yourself in the path of chance. So figure out what your limitation on programming is for you. Figure out whether or not you're a doer or a planner and pursue the other side. Find that copacetic middle ground of making sure that you are reprogramming your mind in order to get the success you want.
So it sounds like what we're talking about here, just to kind of bring it back to the Batman Spider-Man issue, it sounds like we're suggesting a Batman model of, taking the time to build skill, to build towards something, and you may or may not be bit by a spider, and opportunity may or may not come your way, but the likelihood of you having success is probably higher if you're doing something rather than doing nothing. If you're training towards something, is what I'm hearing you say. And the Batman model is what you would recommend people look at seriously to say, hey, it's probably not going to happen if you want to be a filmmaker to put one video on YouTube and then just sit back and wait for a Hollywood producer to find you and pluck you off YouTube and then give you like a 6-movie deal. That's probably not going to happen. It's possible. You might create such an amazing YouTube video that they're just blown away and all of Hollywood is coming after you. But that's probably unlikely. It's more likely that you put video after video out over a period of time and you meet the right people and you put yourself in the particular circumstances and you keep building skill and you keep getting better at your craft and you build a team around you and eventually you're discovered but it's after a lot of work to get there. And maybe you're not discovered. Maybe you build your own studio and you just end up doing YouTube videos and you build your own empire in that way. But it's more likely that you're going to have success having continually working on your craft, continually developing, rather than just putting it out there and hoping somebody recognizes the genius in you. And it's not that you don't have genius. It's just most people don't see inside of you. They can't see inside your soul, your heart, and your mind. They only see what you can put out in the world. So they really only have the outward things to go by, and you might be the most brilliant filmmaker in the world, but they won't know until you make those films for them to see, if that makes any sense. And so as I say that, I know when we do these podcasts, when we do these recordings, I'm always wanting to make sure we don't do too much speculation with our audience, because I feel like I don't want to confuse. If you're listening, I don't want to confuse you. If you don't understand something, I don't want to throw a bunch of terms out to you and make more confusion around things. But I also know that you're smart. If you're listening to us, you're probably an intuitive. You probably have a preference for intuition, and you're most likely very intelligent, just because that's the type of people we attract, right? So you're probably intelligent, you're probably intuitive. And I'm going to throw a speculative comment out here as well, this Batman Spiderman idea. And a little bit of this is to crowdsource, because I'd like to hear some feedback from our tribe and community. It is my tentative belief right now, in this moment of this recording, that certain personality types lend themselves to being a Batman or a Spider-Man style. So I believe, and I actually believe it comes down to what we call here at Personality Hacker the judging functions, the functions that you will use to make decisions, the function you prefer to make decisions with. And there's 4 of those: effectiveness, harmony, authenticity, and accuracy. And it's my belief currently, my speculative belief, let's put it that way, that there are 2 of these, I won't even say that. I'll just say that certain functions tend to lean toward one of these ways of going about things in the world versus the other. And I'd like our community to familiarize yourself with these 4 decision-making functions and give me some feedback. Give us some feedback on the blog, on the Facebook community, about what you might see some patterns emerging in this. And the reason I'm not telling you the pattern that I tend to see and Antonia tends to see is because I really do want to see if these vet out in the real world. So it'd be great to get some feedback and see some of the patterns coming back and some things that I can think about and we can think about. So this is really a great opportunity. I'm excited you're part of this podcast, because this could be a very interactive experience in this way. So that's just something out there. I'd be very interested to see some of the patterns you come up with. We'll try to answer questions and thoughts around this. We've got so much communication right now. We're trying to get to everybody, and we got to figure out strategies for this. So if we don't respond right away, don't think that we're ignoring you or you're stupid or anything. We're just really trying to get to everybody's stuff. And I'd love to hear your feedback about that.
So just to make sure that I understand what you're asking, there's 4 decision-making processes. If you go on Personality Hacker's blog and look up decision-making process, or just look up decision-making in the search term, you'll come up with articles on 4 different decision-making processes: harmony, effectiveness, authenticity, and accuracy. And you're saying that once people familiarize themselves with these 4 decision-making processes, and these are, by the way, the decision-making mental processes of all 16 Myers-Briggs type, segmented into groups of 4. 4 Myers-Briggs types use harmony, 4 use effectiveness, 4 use accuracy, and 4 use authenticity. And you're saying that you believe some of these decision-making processes have a tendency to go more towards the spider bite or the radioactive spider direction, and some of the processes go towards the Batman style.
Almost intrinsically at their personality level, yes.
And you're asking the audience, you're asking the listener to say, which one do you think, of those 4, which one do you think is a radioactive spider style or a Spider-Man style, and which one is a Batman style, intrinsically?
Yeah. So go on, read the information about effectiveness, and then at the end of the article on effectiveness, understand what it's saying there, and just ask yourself, okay, does this lend itself more toward the Batman way of viewing the world or more toward the Spider-Man way of viewing the world? And then do that with accuracy, and then do that with harmony, and then do that with authenticity. And I'd be curious to see what you come up with, because I want to see, because Antonia, again, we always say this is not a discussion ender, this is a discussion starter. This podcast is to engage with you. We want this to be a communicative experience. So go there and, yes, exactly what you're saying. Just try to guess and see. And again, there's no right answer here. This is very open-ended. And it's a theory that I'm playing with, and we're playing with.
But you think you know.
I have a theory.
Yeah,
I don't think I know. I have a
Right.
theory that I'm working with.
Okay, fair enough. So what's interesting about this is that if the listener actually goes and does this, what's cool is that, first of all, they'll familiarize themselves with these decision-making processes, which is good information to have anyway. And also, when they identify their type, the decision-making process for their personality type, and if they ask themselves, am I a Spider-Man or a Batman style, this might actually be a really great side door into going, what's my programming? How am I operating? Am I a Batman or am I a Spider-Man? And what do I need to become more of? And I think that's a great request of the listener. So,
yeah. So we want to hear from you. You can find us at personalityhacker.com, or you can join the ever-growing community over at facebook.com/personalityhacker and twitter.com/personalityhack. I do want to say we're on a bunch of other social networks. We have a presence on Tumblr and Instagram and Pinterest and Flickr. And I mean, we're represent a lot of different places. And the reason why we don't say those every single time is because you can do a search. You can find a lot of that information on our website to get to those places, whatever preferred platform you like to use. And the other thing is social media comes and goes. And so we have to, I guess, focus in on a few platforms that we feel are great community building platforms. And obviously Facebook and Twitter have been here for a while. We believe they're going to be here for a while longer. And it's a great place right now to connect. But feel free to connect with us on any social media platform, the one that you prefer to use, because we're represented there. Maybe not as much as Facebook and Twitter, but we do have a presence on all of those. So we'd invite you to come and join us at those as well. And of course, Antonia will always say, which I'm just going to say it for you, go and give us a rating on this podcast. If you would just click the little star, it's 1 to 5 stars, and then you can put a little bit of a text in there to say what the podcast means to you, what it's been doing, what have you been learning, is it a good podcast, would you recommend it to other people? We'd love to have some feedback and continue to grow the tribe, grow the community, because it's really you that's going to make a difference here. I mean, Antonia and I can sit behind this microphone all day long, but without you and you being a part of this community, it's not, we're just going to be talking to thin air. So we're really glad you're joining us every week and want to see that continue. So my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we will talk to you on the next episode.